system. Knowing some details of the information readily available. Just got it on the second screen.
May we call to order the January 25th, 2016 meeting of the Danville Utility Commission. Please call the roll.
Vanessa Kane.
Here.
Bill Donahue. Ken Larkin.
Here.
Michael Nicholas. Bob Shaughnessy.
Here.
Fred Shanks.
Here.
Philip Smith.
Here.
Jim Turpin.
Here.
Thank you. Are there any announcements anyone would like to make before we begin? There being none. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Probably would be appropriate to introduce Jason Gray as the utility director effective last week. No longer the interim utility director, but the utility director. So I want to offer him congratulations on that appointment, and I'm sure he's looking forward to continuing to work with you all. Very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Larkin. Jason, do you have something you'd like to say?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Larkin, and look forward to working with this commission.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you, Jason. Glad to have you. Next order of business, the chair will entertain a motion for the minutes of the November 23rd, 2015 meeting. Do I hear a resolution to accept those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Are there any deletions, additions, or amendments to those minutes that anyone would like to discuss? I hear none. All in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. Opposed, no. Motion carried unanimously. Next order of business is a review of utilities financial statements. Ms. Connor, nice to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good afternoon. Today we're going to review the November utility financial statements, which puts us at 42% through our fiscal year. So if you'll turn with me to page 9 for the wastewater fund. It reports operating revenue at $4.1 million, which is in line with the budget, and at 42%, and is very comparable to last year. Our operating expenses are within budgeted levels at 37%. Total operating expenses show a 5% increase from last year, primarily in the transmission and treatment line. This is a timing difference in the Severn Trent billings. The distribution line shows a 19% decrease from last year. This is due to additional expense last year for the downtown sanitary sewer rehab project and the installation of the Vapor Router Commander system. With revenues coming in at budget and expenses contained under budget, net income after transfers is reported at $1.1 million, which compares favorably to last year and to budgeted net income. We'll turn to the water fund on page 10. It reports operating revenue slightly ahead of budget at 44% and $3.6 million, which is a slight decrease from last year. Operating expenses of $2.3 million are within budgeted levels at 38% and show a 7% increase from last year. This increase is primarily in transmission and treatment and is due to additional expense for chemical supplies this year. The general and administrative line also shows a slight increase due to higher depreciation expense and bond issuance costs. After factoring in non-operating revenue and expenses, the fund reports net income after transfers of $918,000. And while this is a decrease of 15% compared to last year, it compares favorably to the budget at 83%. So we'll turn to the gas fund on page 11. Our revenues in the gas fund are slowly catching up with operating expenses as we move into the heating season. Year-to-date sales and gas purchases are only at 27% of budget. Revenues were down 10% compared to last year due to decreased consumption in the residential and commercial categories. Our total operating expenses also ran under budget, coming in at $1.9 million, or 33% of the budget, and were very comparable to last year in total and in the categories. Net income before transfers was $760,000, or 19% of budget, and is very comparable to last year. The gas cost recovery was an under recovery of $434,000 at November 30th. We'll go to the electric fund on page 12. It reports operating revenues of $44 million, which slightly trails the budget at 39% and reflects a 7% decrease from last year. However, when we exclude the PCA recovery line item that flows into operating revenue, we actually show a 6% increase based just on the consumption sales. Our purchase power costs were in line with sales and also at 39% of the budget. Overall, year-to-date kilowatt-hour consumption increased by 3.5% from last year, which is reflected in the true increase in our operating revenue. Total operating expenses of $6.8 million are in line with the sales volume and are also at 39% of the budget. Our total operating expenses are very comparable to last year within a 1% variance. The uptick in our general and administrative expenses is primarily due to bond issue costs. The fund reports net income before transfers of $3.4 million and a net loss after transfers of $770,000. The large variance from last year to this year is due to the anticipated effect of the PCA write-off. And the power cost recovery was a cumulative under-recovery of $10.7 million at November 30th.
Let me ask you a question right there, just for clarification. You said that the net income is impacted by the write-off?
Correct.
That's the $2 million
Correct.
write-off?
Correct.
Okay. Well, we took the money and shifted it from the retained earnings to the fund, you know what I'm saying.
So with,
Right.
so
The
with,
unrestricted fund balance to that account receivable.
When we wrote
The
it off,
PCA.
it was a direct hit to the operating revenue. and
Right,
it will
for the
flow. Yes.
current period.
Right.
Okay. So keep in mind, there's $2 million there that was moved.
Right.
Thank you.
so in essence, if you put that $2 million back, we'd actually be a little ahead in net income than last year.
Correct. When you compare the two. Any other questions on electric? If not, we'll move to.
Yes, on the power cost adjustment. So we're actually, we've been making a pretty large, including the $2 million, but not just the $2 million, but all the other adjustments that have been made. We've been making a dent in that overall, but this past month we did not. Is that correct?
This past month, there was a little dip in it, of a recovery of $113,000.
Under recovered, correct?
No, that was a recovery.
Oh, we did.
Or the change in the month, the change from October to November, is
Right.
that what we're trying to look at and capture?
Okay, I was reading the number wrong. Okay.
We've continued to recover
Okay.
over the last.
I had read that 8 as a 6, so that's why, on
Okay.
the previous.
Any other questions on electric? We'll move to telecommunications on page 13. Telecommunications reports operating revenue of $645,000 at 39% of the budget. Purchase services were running ahead of budget at 50% and show an increase of 17% compared to last year. Our general and administrative expenses came in at 32% of the budget, which is comparable to sales and to last year. The fund reports net income after transfers of $191,000 at 55% of the budget. And then just a note, our fiscal year 2015 CAFR is being printed, so as soon as those are ready, we will distribute them to you.
Does anyone have any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Connor.
Thank you.
Next order of business is a review, is a discussion of solar generation purchase power agreement. Mr. Gray.
Good afternoon. Over the past 6 months, we've been reviewing the results of the RFP that we released for electric capacity and generation. We received 6 solar responses and about a dozen natural gas responses that we'll bring back to the commission later this spring. But what I'm here today to talk about is the solar responses. What makes the solar responses attractive is the federal investment tax credit As you remember back in October when Garrett Cole from GDS Associates was here, that tax credit was supposed to expire at the end of 2016. It's been extended to 2019, and we'll go past that in a lower rate. Some things have changed since we last talked about this in October. But the tax credit is no longer expiring at the end of 2016, and will now expire at the end of 2019 at the 30% level. So that's good news for us as we look forward to this project and discuss it. So just some background information about the technology. There's really two different kinds of panels, solar panels. You have the fixed panels, which are don't move. They have the same amount of capacity factor throughout the period of time throughout the year. Or you have the single axis tracking, which you have more capital costs, more maintenance required in those, but you have a higher capacity factor there. You get more megawatt hours out of those. By investing more into the equipment, they have motors that actually turn and track the sun with those panels. So with the fixed panels, you can expect about a 17% capacity factor. With the single axis tracking, you can expect anywhere from 20 to 25% capacity factor, depending on your location in the country.
So, Jason, those only track then in a single axis, and between winter and summer, if it needs an adjustment at another axis, is there any way of making those adjustments? Or?
No, they move throughout the day as the sun moves, and then they move back into
So
place.
why are they called single axis?
Because they only move with the sun.
Yes.
That's it.
So, but I mean, there's no need to shift them off in the other direction.
No, they move east to west and then move back into place for the next morning. So they're very simple, but the only problem is you have more maintenance costs. You have motors that you have to maintain, more moving parts.
Jason, they just move one direction though.
Right.
They don't move vertically.
Right.
They use horizontally, they don't move vertically. I think Bob was talking about the sun in the winter, or the summer. In the winters, at a little different angle in terms of vertical.
Well, they move in the same direction. They don't move left to right. They move up and down.
Okay.
For altitude of the height of the sun.
Right. So out of the 6 responses, we had a number of responses that we went through and reviewed, and GDS Associates was very helpful in the process. But the most beneficial for Danville was the one from Turning Point Energy and Solar City. They're partnering together to provide a response for us, and it's a 25-year purchase power agreement, which means that the city would not be expected to maintain the facility or invest in any shape or form in the capital cost of the project. They would be responsible for 100% of the maintenance of the facility, anything that is responsible for with the property or the panels themselves. We would just be responsible for the outtake of the power, 100% outtake of the power. It's very simple. They would be responsible for the maintenance. We would be responsible for the outtake of the power. Estimated generation would be 11% per year. 11,000 megawatts a year. And with solar, you can expect about a 1% decline each year as the panels degrade. So keep that in mind. It's a flat price, flat purchase power price of $77.10 a megawatt hour. Usually with purchase power agreements, you have an escalation there, but there is no escalation price here. Over the 25 years, so we just have a flat price, and I'll get into that here more in a little bit. But we are able to get what they call the solar renewable energy certificates or credits after year 10, which we're able to sell into states that have renewable standards. Virginia does not have a renewable standard right now. They have a goal, but states like Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, they all have standards which utilities have to maintain a certain portion of their portfolio towards renewable energy. So we can sell those renewable credits into those states and value them. We also are able to benefit from the behind-the-meter benefits of having this project because it would be built on our territory. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. So here are the project costs of the solar project. What I want you to focus on is the net energy rate, which is the lower blue portion. We have a higher energy rate at the very beginning of the project in the mid-50s, and then it tails off towards the end of the project in the upper 20s, and this is dollars per megawatt hour. So, we're subtracting all the capacity charges, all the transmission charges of having it local here on our system, and then valuing them against what we would have to purchase on the market and transport here to Danville. So we're reducing all those benefits and subtracting them from that $77.10 a megawatt hour. So that's the net effect of the price.
Now, is that decrease that we see, is that the 1% degradation of the panels?
No, that's 1% of the production of the facility. So we're just talking about price here. We're subtracting what we would be charged for capacity, what would be charged for transmission, ancillary charges, all of that. So we're not talking about production.
So, Jason, be sure I understand. What you're saying is if we went off system and bought an equivalent amount of power, we would have to buy it, say, at the first year, $54 a megawatt hour.
If we went off system,
If we went off system, we'd have to buy it at $54 a megawatt hour and then pay the additional cost to get it here.
Right.
To be equivalent. Is
The
that
additional,
correct?
it would cost us additional $9 for transmission cost, an additional $12 in capacity.
So
The
that's why we
$54,
say we're saving the cost of getting it here. I know that 77 cents is still not at the level where we can be competitive with the industrial rate. I believe it said it was $5 or $50 or $60 equivalent. And I know there's a lot of things that says this is a good project, but I just want to be a little cautious because we thought we've had good projects before. And then as time went along, we're paying more. And with the price of natural gas coming down, gas generation, and we're able to buy power off system now lower than this, do we still feel confident looking into crystal ball that we're going to be in good shape?
I think my next slide will answer your question. So let me get to that slide in just a minute. If there are any other questions on this slide, does everybody understand what we're trying to represent here? Is the net savings of the project or the net cost? So here's the answer to your question.
I'm sorry. With regard to your last question, how are we determining the availability of this amount of power when you have fluctuations in solar conditions, such as cloud cover, wintertime versus summertime, things like that? How do we know that's going to cover the amount that we're projecting here?
As far as the capacity, well, the capacity revenue is based on your 5 highest summer peaks between June and September. So we're evaluating it to produce at those periods of time. So if it's cloudy during that day or raining or whatever, then we're going to have a lower value for that charge than what's represented here. But if we're able to perform at the highest level, we'll have a higher charge. So that we factor in like a median cost.
Okay.
To answer Mr. Turpin's question, you wanted to compare it to market power. The net savings or the net project energy rate is obviously higher for the first 10 years because we're having to give up those solar RECs, the solar renewable energy credits for the first 10 years because the developer gets those credits for the first 10 years. After those 10 years, we retain those and are able to sell them into states that have renewable energy standards or are required to maintain renewable projects in their portfolio. So as you can see, after 10 years, this project is valued below market pricing. And overall, over that 25-year term, market is valued at, I'm having trouble seeing this laptop. Market's valued at $45. The net project value is valued at $38.
So even though Virginia doesn't have these credits, or laws for this credit, right now we can still for sure sell them to other states who do have the credits.
And if Virginia ever did require that we have standards, we could sell them into Virginia. Any questions about this slide?
Can you go back a minute and explain to me, give me the definition again for ancillary credits?
Ancillary charges?
Mm-hmm.
Or
It
the
was
credits?
it was $2 on.
Right.
What's the definition of that?
Tax credit.
That's PJM's administrative cost,
Oh, okay.
things like that.
More freight,
Right.
if you will. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
A little bit about the project site. We have been looking at different project sites in Danville and Pennsylvania County within our territory. One adjacent to one of our substations on Kentucky Church Road, beside Dan River High School and behind Kentucky Elementary School, is available for sale and would be ideal for this project. It's it would be big enough for a 6 megawatt facility that we could tie into one of our feeders there that would be very useful for that area. We have about 4,000 customers off that one substation. So,
Jason, are we, are we required by any type of federal regulations to have some of our power supply on these renewable energy forms? Has that been put into law yet?
we are not required, but we do have enough hydrogen when these AMP hydro projects come online that we're going to have about 20% of our portfolio renewable with our Pinnacles generation, our SEPA generation, the Schoolfield generation. All that put together is going to equal out to about 20%.
But right now, it's not required by any of the power generators, whether federal or state regulated?
Not in Virginia. It's a standard, but not it's a goal, but not a standard.
Do you think they're going to require it eventually?
Yeah, eventually.
So we'll be ahead of the game to have our
Right.
power supply.
Could you repeat that again about the 20% part?
If you combine the 5 hydro dams on the Ohio River, our Pinnacles hydro, the SEPA hydro, which is 2 dams, one at Smith Mountain Lake and one at Kerr Reservoir at Bugs Island, and then Schoolfield Dam. If you add all those together, you get about 20% renewable.
And then this will only add to that.
Yeah, this is about 1.5% of our power supply.
1.5% renewable
Right.
increase. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
The property will be purchased by whom?
It'll be purchased by Turning Point Energy in Solar City, the developer.
The developer, okay.
There would be options if we ever were to be interested in buying the project ourselves in future years, but initially it would be purchased by the developer.
This developer's been around for quite some time.
They do solar development for Duke, Dominion, PG&E in California, and Hawaii Electric.
What happens when, or how likely is it to happen that any type of company like this would go under?
Well, Solar City is the investor, The Turning Point's the developer, and Solar City is a billion-dollar company, and there are clauses in the agreement that we're reviewing that have language of what happens when if that should happen.
Such as the return clawbacks for our asset, for
Right.
the assets.
Right. We would have an option to purchase the site at whatever value it had at that time.
Jason, you know, every one of these projects that we've entered into, the costs tend to increase as we're going through it. Now, I know we have, in this case, just a price for purchasing power from them.
Mm-hmm.
What's the possibility, is there a possibility that, let's say, the capital costs on this thing start to skyrocket like they have in others, and suddenly it's much higher, and they come back to us and say, look here, we got a big problem. Prices on this have gone way up. We're going to have to raise the price of...
I would say the project would not be economical then, and we would walk away from it. But I would say the project pricing at $77.10 cannot go any higher. In fact, we will look to make it lower, because we've put it, when we were looking at the completion date to be the end of 2016, we built in some reassurance that power will be available at the end of 2016. And now that that's been extended to 2019, we can take that out and hopefully lower the $77 rate. The cost of panels will hopefully go down between now and the time this project is built, if it's approved. So there's no immediate need to have this project built by December 2016, but we do want to move forward with it if it's economical, and which we think it is to our system. And so it can only go down, is my point.
So if they tried to raise the price, then we could walk away from it without any contract
Exactly.
problems?
Exactly. The only thing we're responsible for as far as capital investment is that we would have to purchase a step-up transformer, which is our interconnection point, and build a distribution line to the facility.
What's the construction schedule if we go forward with this?
Whenever we could do it later this summer or even this fall, depends on when the pricing is right. As far as the solar panels, if the solar panels have dropped down, we can move forward with the project and do it this summer. And as part of this budget you're getting ready to hear.
So it's short construction time, 3 or 4 months?
Or less, yeah.
Did you repeat that?
The construction's very minimal,
Okay. Construction time 3 or 4 months?
or less.
Okay. And so who's making the call on when to start?
Pardon me?
The developer making the when to start construction, or we?
The process would be they would go through the local permitting process, get the special use permit, get DEQ's blessing on the site,
Right.
make sure there's no wetlands to mitigate, and then move forward once all the permitting has been taken care of, and then start with ordering all the equipment and grading. There's a little bit of grading to be done on this site, not much, and clearing, and then start building the project. This project could be built by the end of 2016. That was the original intention.
Is that still the intention?
It could be where we could wait a few months to see how the panel pricing goes now that the tax credit deadline is no longer the end of 2016. If the price per panel drops down and we were to save $2 a megawatt hour, we may look to build this in the spring of 2017. But we want to move forward with negotiating a purchase power agreement and an interconnection agreement, and retain any savings we get with them from the savings they get on the panels.
So but the numbers you have gave us then are not, they're not set in stone.
They're not set in stone, but they're not to exceed that $77.10.
Not to exceed. So at this point, an important variable in the cost is the price of the panels, and given
The replacement power that we built in
Okay.
to have it up and running by the end of 2016, which is no longer a factor.
Is this technology still changing rapidly, or is it pretty much leveled off? And where are these panels coming from? Are they from, American made, or are they foreign made, or what do we know about them?
I don't know where they're made, but I do believe the technology has reached a level playing field. Duke is building a lot of solar in North Carolina. If you drive down 29 or even 220, you see a lot of solar generation being built on old farmland, tobacco fields.
And
Jason, I didn't quite hear what you answered. $77 is really not a fixed cost yet?
It's not a fixed cost. It can only go down from there. It will not go up.
Okay.
how long do you suspect that these panels will last before they need to be replaced?
They will last the 25 years, but there's a 1% per
But
year
they will-
degradation.
Only have 75% capacity after those 25 years then.
Right. So instead of 11,000 megawatt hours, you would have 8,000.
And within those 25 years, technology may change quite a bit within those 25 years. It's
I
possible.
expect it will.
And so they may become obsolete much quicker than the 25 years.
And obsolescence might be a factor of technology, but also a price. You would think that the technology is going to slash the price of the panels and the equipment and batteries and, so you would think you're going to get cheaper generation costs
I was
with
going
more
to say
technology.
battery storage is more of a
Sure.
role in the next 5
That's
years.
the next part of this solar power thing is the battery storage.
Yep.
Does this include battery storage, this
does-
project?
It does not.
I'm sorry, Fred.
Jason, if I remember, we've got excess power purchase agreements through 2017, is that right?
Right.
How does this power, this doesn't help. Wouldn't it be better for us to put this off until after we had the excess
Well, this
removed?
wouldn't come online until 2017.
Oh, okay, it will come on, okay.
Yeah.
How will this generation be handled? Is this a net, what do you call it? As far as the grid goes, is it going to follow one of our rate schedules, or does this just sit there and produce power for the city right into our system, or how does that work? Does it follow a rate schedule or anything?
No, it's just another generation project. It's just part of our power supply portfolio. It just mixed it in with all of our other projects, our Prairie States, our Fremonts, our hydros.
Okay. But here there is no transportation costs,
No congestion costs.
congestion costs,
No
nothing.
capacity charges. In fact, we get capacity revenue for having this project. Any other questions?
Yes. This is unlikely to help in the wintertime congestion issues, but it could help during the summer.
It could help as long as we have a sunny day, but during a cloudy event, no, it's not going to help.
But, realistically, it's a summer. Okay, let me back up.
It's not going to help during our transmission peak. It's going to help
Right.
during our capacity peak, our 5C peak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a really cold day and it's sunny out, does the ambient temperature make any difference as to what these cells produce?
No, it's about sunlight and sunrise.
It's about sunlight only.
Anyone else? Thank you, Jason.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a proposed motion if you can entertain.
Yes, sir, I'm gonna go move to that right now. I draw the commission's attention to page 17 of your agenda packet, and there is a motion a recommendation, a recommended motion. Would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make the recommendation. I move that the Danville Utility Commission recommend to City Council that Danville Utility staff enter into a purchase power agreement for 6 megawatts of local solar generation to be constructed, owned, and operated by Turning Point Energy.
Do I hear a second?
I think it's the right thing to do. I'll second it.
Mr. Shosky seconds Mr. Turpin's motion. Would we like to have any further discussion about this? Does anyone have any comments or reservations or anything to say? All in favor of the motion as presented, raise your right hand. All opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And now what we've all been waiting for. We now have the introduction of the fiscal year 2017 utilities budget. Ms. Holly,
Good
are
afternoon,
you going to do
everyone.
this for us?
I am.
Are you going to stand before us, or are you just going to take so long you just want to sit?
I'm going to sit.
Fine.
If that's okay with you.
I would probably do the same.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We have two budget packages for you. One is the proposed operating budget, and the second one is the proposed capital budget. We're going to start with the operating budget, and what I'll do is to transition from fund to fund, beginning with Fund 51, address the operating budget, the regular capital, and the capital improvement plan for each budget, and then move on to the next one, if that's agreeable with everyone. This is also how the package is arranged for you today. So starting on page 2, and continuing on page 3, we have the summary for all utility funds. The things to note here are that we have included in these budgets the rate increases recommended in our cost of service study last year. In the water fund, that would be 3% or approximately $240,000. And in the electric fund, 1.5%, which is approximately $1.7 million. The other funds do not call for a rate increase, but also to note, the gas fund would require a $350,000 transfer from fund balance in order to fully fund our capital projects. These pages include the items that are common to all the funds. Salary adjustments. There is a specific line item within budget for salaries and wages adjustment. That was the pay for performance and compression for 2016. In 2016, in all funds combined, that amount was $416,000, and in 2017, that amount is $192,000. So there's a substantial decrease in what we anticipate the adjustments to be this year. And you'll see throughout the funds that there is a decrease in administration generally because of this large decrease.
Could I ask a question, please?
Certainly.
We have previously discussed in the Utility Commission the water fund increase of 3%, which had been, I believe, recommended by the rate consultant. We had discussed the city general fund began reimbursing the water fund for fire department, the water use fire department for the fire plugs that they had previously paid, the city had previously paid until about 4 years ago when they had a little shortfall in the budget and they didn't pay that. I thought we had understanding with the administration at that time that the general fund would reimburse that or begin paying for that water again, and therefore we would not have to have a general rate increase.
That was about
Would somebody-
$400,000. Wasn't that about $400,000?
It was about 200. It was about 220.
240.
It just happened to be just about what the amount was for this particular increase that the rate consultant had handed us. It just so happened that it worked out that way. So,
Yes.
if someone could kind of respond to that, I appreciate it.
Could we discuss that when we the water fund?
All right, fine, but let's don't forget it.
Okay.
All right.
Jenny, just one question. Overall, what percentage does the salary adjustments, represent?
In general, it's 2%. I say that would be 2% per employee. Just overall, it's 2% per fund.
Okay.
2%, you say, Jim?
Yes, sir.
Overall general, average.
Yes.
That's not cost of living, that's just strictly moving up in the pay grades?
That
Pay
is not
scale.
cost of living. It is the number that we thought the utility fund and the general fund may be able to manage in this fiscal year. The general fund of course hasn't been to city council. There's no proposal, but we had to have a placeholder for this budget, and in discussions with the city manager's office and with the budget office and finance, we determined that about 2% would be what we could put in for this year. This would all be subject to city council approval, and the budget department may actually recommend a higher or lower number. This is a 2% placeholder for us.
It's just a budgeted number. It's just a number that we can.
But I have a little trouble hearing you, Jenny, but is it a cost of living, or are you just allowing them, it's pay for performance?
It's pay for performance.
So there's no cost of living?
No, there's no.
As you may be aware, the city did pay for performance program a couple years, and in order for that to be successful, it's something that needs to be funded on an annual basis. Otherwise, you get into issues with compression. So our goal is to have pay for performance within the next budget. And the recommendation to the utilities department, when they were putting together this recommendation, was to put 2% in as a pay for performance amount, which would represent an average of increases depending on how the employees scored on their performance appraisal. So it is purely pay for performance, no cost of living.
Okay. I have two questions. When would these pay for performance increases occur? During the fiscal year?
July, it will be effective with their first check in July.
Okay. So the evaluations are going to start pretty quickly.
Yeah, we're,
This is not a mid-year, like a, January 1 deal where then you have to have that placeholder. And the second question, has the city general fund, are they going to budget for a 2% increase also? Or
That
are
is
they
our
gonna have
goal.
more or less,
Our goal,
2%?
yes.
Okay. That's your goal?
We don't have all the information in
Okay.
to have budget present.
I'd just like to say that I believe that the utilities should be treated the same way in the budget process as the general fund does. So
I agree.
I'd just
It would
like
occur
to
on
make
their
that comment.
anniversary date, wouldn't it? Evaluation?
No, all the evaluations occur at the same time for every city employee. They're done in June, supposed to be completed by June, and they're effective their first check in July for those that qualify.
What about new employees, only been here a few months?
They have to have had a year.
You're born a year if it came in
Yep.
July or...
It depends on when they were hired, but they have to have had a full year before they can be eligible.
What about new employees, only been here a few months?
They have to have had a year. Yep. It depends on when they were hired, but they have to have had a full year before they can be eligible.
'Cause
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Retirement rates slightly decreased. We had a recommendation to decrease the funding from 7.02% of covered payroll to 6.659%. The transfer to the general fund has remained constant. This is the 4th fiscal year that we've had the transfer to be the same amount across all utility funds. It's $14.8 million. We have $7.4 million in capital projects. We'll go over those when we get to the specific funds. We do have recommended bonds of $1.5 million in the electric fund and none in the other funds. So on pages 4 and 5, you have a utility funds by function. This summarizes revenue and summarizes expenditures by divisions for each fund. If you'll note, debt service on page 4, that's principal. Interest is within the administrative functions in each fund. And on page 5, we come back to a revenue over expenditures of $230,380. So we'll continue. We'll start with the wastewater fund. The narrative begins on page 6. The fund summary the fund summary begins on page 7.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Before we get into that,
Yes.
can we discuss or go over for a moment the bottom of page 2 with regard to expenditures? It was noted during the presentation here just a minute ago that the expenditures have remained, or the appropriations have remained steady for 4 straight years at $14.8 million.
Yes.
For the benefit of the Utility Commission, could someone say what is generating that? In other words, if I remember correctly, there's policy that sets what the contribution can be. And that was a policy that was approved by council a couple of years ago. For the benefit of the Utility Commission, also for the benefit of the council members that may be watching, could we have that policy noted for the record? Can someone summarize that policy?
Let me ask Michael to come up here, and I know he can explain it. Sir, Michael Atkins.
Let me put some emphasis on why I'm asking. That number, the recent, whenever it was 2-4 years ago, the policy that was adopted will never let that number go down. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I think that's a little known fact, and I'd like to have that policy summarized for us.
Sure. I can provide it later in written
Okay.
form, so I'm not leaving
I didn't
anything
mean to
out.
catch you off guard,
It's
but
okay.
it's very important.
I was going to ask later about, that policy was set in motion so you could adjust the contributions every 2 years, I think, at the biennial rate, based
Yes.
on the increase in the fixed assets, et cetera.
Yes.
And evidently, we've dropped that. We're not following that.
Well, I think the policy is a guide when we look to see if the electric funds, the utility funds, can afford the increase that is allowed by
Speaking
policy.
to Mike a little bit.
We look at the policy every year and determine whether the utility funds can absorb that type of increase. It is based on average investment in fixed assets, as you said. And to my knowledge, if I remember correctly, looking at that, applying that policy would have authorized an increase almost every year, if not every year. But then we look at the performance of the utility funds themselves to see if they could absorb that increase. If not, it just remains the same. And I think that's what we've seen over the last several years. Mr. Shanks, you are right. The policy says that number will not decrease. And it all hinges and is based on a milestone year or a marker year of, I think, 2009, fiscal 2009 is the basis year, and we build from there. But it sounds like you pretty much have the details in mind, and I can provide a written copy just to have it in front of everyone.
And the reason why I asked, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I think that was a policy that was adopted that maybe deserved more discussion. And I would like for us, as the year progresses, to have that discussion. If there's, it was a recommendation by this commission to City Council. I'm not sure everybody understands that that's a number that's been set up to always increase. And while I understand why you don't want it to decrease, the fact that we've built in a multiplier bothers me, and I think I would love for you, the Utility Commission, to discuss that one more time.
That's an excellent idea, and I think we'll certainly put that on a future agenda. But let me just say this about it. One of the reasons why I think that was set up was to have some kind of certainty about what the general fund was going to ask of the utilities, especially the power and light, in the view of some of the financial transfers that were made during the Great Recession. And at the same time, while the general fund has shown a lot of forbearance in not increasing these rates, increasing these amounts, certainly there are other transactions that are going on inside the budget that we're going to talk about here later, where the city is certainly, this general fund is certainly receiving some really good benefits from the other utilities, utility funds. Mr. Turner?
Well, I believe on the steering committee, of course, it was the electric, but it was, one of the suggestions was to review the contribution to the general fund formula and pattern and see what, if it needs to be adjusted. So it probably would apply to all the utilities, not only the electric. I believe that was one of the recommendations.
Yes, sir. But this, the electric fund was the only fund that was subject to this rolling calculation. Is that correct?
No, all of
Was it all?
All.
Okay. Well, of course, but Danville Power and Light, of course, is the most important. That's duly noted. We'll certainly get back to that. And as Mr. Turpin pointed out, that is on our list of recommendations that this commission is going to look into based on the steering committee's report from last spring. Go ahead. You finished? Everybody, you okay, Fred?
Yeah, yes.
All right, thank you. Ms. Holly?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So on page 6, we have the narrative discussing the wastewater fund. The fund summary by function begins on page 7. I noted here that the 3.5% rate increase recommended in the cost of service study last year and adopted by council has been included in this budget, of course. It moved from the line item rate increase to the specific components of charges for services. We have a 0% growth rate in wastewater. I've listed for you the particular expenditure lines, what increased, what decreased, and the summary of why. Another very important part of this budget is that we're recommended in 2017 a reduction in our capital projects within the utility funds from $550,000 to $50,000 for 2 reasons. The primary reason is that there is a note from wastewater to water and gas that we'd like to pay off in this budget. So there's a substantial increase on page 7. If you'll look at debt service, there's an increase of $1.1 million. That's principal payments to the gas and electric funds. So we're foregoing all but $50,000 of the capital projects at the wastewater treatment plant so that we can pay this debt off early.
And let me just make a few comments there. There are some projects that were delayed in wastewater that we will complete in fiscal 17, so there's no need to add any more money in for wastewater for next year. So we're able to pay off the electric and water and gas note and focused in on other areas in future years. So we will be able to fund wastewater projects in the next fiscal year totally out of that fund.
The details of the wastewater fund begin on page 11 and do include public works, installation of the sewer taps, repairs to them, and capital projects for public works. Utilities operating expenditures begin on page 13. If you have specific questions concerning the pluses and minuses on these pages, in regular capital maintenance, we are including $300,000 for replacing motors, pumps, and control centers at the treatment plant, repairing the roof, engineering for treatment modifications, and there is a $100,000 contingency within regular capital and all funds, with the exception of power and light.
Could you repeat that, please?
There's a $100,000 contingency within each fund, with the exception of power and light, and it's $500,000 in power and light.
And where is that shown?
It's included in regular capital maintenance.
Give me a page number.
Line.
Can you do that?
It is on page 14 at the bottom.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. For projects, we've included.
Wait, question.
I'm sorry.
Why are we starting that contingency? It looks like it hasn't been budgeted before.
It's been budgeted annually. If you look in the middle column, FY 2016 budget, there's $100,000.
Right.
And in the department request, FY 2017, there's the same $100,000.
But the previous 2 years.
We have not had to use that money in the past 2 years.
Okay. Oh, actual. Okay. All right.
Sometimes, though, also, and it may not be the same with utilities, but you don't spend out of the contingency line item. You'll transfer it to a different line item and spend out of that line item as needed. So that's why you never see any.
Zeros out.
Yep.
Public Works has $1,250,000 in capital projects. They begin on page 2, capital project budget. There's Apple Branch sewer line for $700,000, new sewer lines inflow and infiltration reduction of $250,000, and sewer line reconstruction of $300,000. The details of those projects, I'm sorry I didn't bring those with me, but if you have questions, Mr. Drazinovich is here and he can answer your questions about those. We have $50,000 in process modifications at the plant itself, recommended.
I always wonder about, this work that is recurring every year, like, reconstruction of existing lines. Why doesn't that show under regular capital instead of new capital?
Well, generally, the dollar amount is large enough that we call it a named project. For example, in water and gas, they actually have phases to them. I think they're on phase 14, 15, 16 at this point. So we actually name the project rather than have it in regular capital. Also, in regular capital maintenance, if we cannot spend that money in that particular year, it returns to the fund balance. But if it's in a named project and we don't spend it all, then we keep that money and we ask for less money the following year for it.
Okay, so if it's got a name, basically it becomes new capital.
Both regular capital and capital improvements are capitalized at the end of the year. Regular capital generally are smaller in dollar amounts. The named projects are larger dollars, as you see here, 250, 300,000, 700,000.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions regarding wastewater?
Let me ask you a question now. I want to make sure I get this straight. The sewer line projects are out of the Public Works budget.
They are included in this budget. The wastewater budget is shared between utilities and public works. So they do appear, if you look on page 7, there's capital projects and sewer capital projects, the bottom of the page, 50,000 and then 1,250,000. So they're all represented in this budget.
Who's paying for that?
The ratepayers.
1.25.
The ratepayers.
The ratepayers are paying for the sewer.
Yes,
Out of wastewater charges.
out of wastewater charges.
Okay. The so the recommendation to build the sewer lines comes from Public Works.
It does.
What criteria is used to determine whether or not you're going to build new sewer lines?
I'll have Mr. Drazinovich, if he will, address that question for us.
Mr. Drazinovich, nice to have you with us, sir. Thank you very much for your good work over the weekend and all your employees.
The crews
We
worked hard and did an
appreciate it.
excellent job.
Thank you.
The large projects that you see, Apple Branch, Sandy Creek, and Luna Lake, they come from the I&I study that we've done recently, and those are Apple Branch and Sandy Creek are the primary lines that we're having infiltration problems on. Also, we televise these lines to see what the condition of the pipe is, and then we put together a project, often phased like Sandy Creek is, to replace segments of the line and restore them to new. Luna Lake Road project comes from the 1989 sewer needs assessment study that assessed the whole city and really made a 20-year plan for replacing sanitary sewers. And we're getting toward the end of that plan now. Luna Lake does not have sewers, and that's to extend the sewers into that area.
Well, how much is that Lunar Lake? I'm not seeing that on my,
The Luna Lake
what I'm looking at here.
sewers in future phases, 2020,
Okay.
as is the
I'm
Sandy
sorry.
Creek.
I've got it now. And that's new construction.
Yeah, that's new construction. The ones all prior to that in 17, 18, and 19 are removal and replacement of existing construction.
What is the policy on new construction of sewer lines? Do you go and do a survey? Do you find out if you have any customers? Do you assess the need?
There was a needs assessment done when the city annexation occurred, and we work off of that. But yes, we do look and look at the number of new services and the number of potential attachments to the sewer system.
Good. I think that would be very important. You know, these sewer lines are very costly, and they have their long run times to recover.
That's correct.
As you know, and you certainly want to know if there's a need, and if you're going to be able to start recovering any of this, if you're going to have a revenue source to pay for these very high cost infrastructure projects. Do you agree with that?
Yes, the early years of the sewer needs study were in high concentration areas where they had a lot of connections. The later years are in lesser concentration areas like Luna Lake, right, and not many connections, and that's why it's out in 2020. We transitioned over to replacing existing sewer lines to try and reduce our inflow and infiltration, and those are the priorities in the early years. So the Luna Lake is really a placeholder. It may keep moving out as long as
Good.
we're not having
Thank you.
problems with the septic tanks and we don't have any major issues.
Thank you very much for that reason.
So you do a feasibility study, do you project the future revenue and bring it back to net present value to see if there's enough revenue to cover the cost today? for, say, a 20-year period or something like that?
The sewer connections don't cover the cost of the sewers. These sewer projects are very, very expensive. They're primarily to solve the problem of failing septic tanks in areas where DEQ or the health department may require us to start making connections. So we generally do it based on the number of failed septic tanks in an area. And if we're not seeing a lot of failed septic tanks, we assume we're not going to have a lot of connections, and we don't make it a priority.
So it really, it's, to see if it's going to pay for itself is not a factor. It's a health hazard.
The sewer connection, the sewer income is so low per connection that, and the sewer extension costs for low-density areas is so high that it almost can't pay for itself.
Mr. Shanks?
That kind of brought up a question regarding policy. Does the city allow new septic tanks to be installed?
It's a health department question, but I don't think they allow them unless there's extenuating circumstances.
And I was thinking it was something in our policy that would not allow.
You have to go in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals in order to install a new septic tank, and they've got to approve it.
So it's kind of a catch-22 for any landowners. If we don't serve the area and they can't get a septic tank.
And if we don't serve the area, the BZA then meets the 5 of the 5 criteria that you got to meet to get a special exception permit, and then they would be allowed, but it's a certain distance. So there would be a situation where it might be allowed in an extreme case where it's an outlying area where we don't come close enough, but for the most part it's not allowed without and you've got to go through the BZA in order to get it.
Mr. Chairman, I realize that was not a budget issue, but as we go through stuff like this, it's good to see.
I agree. This is one time of the year when we get to think about everything that goes on as we're looking at the budget. I agree with you.
And I should say the BZA is the Board of Zoning Appeals. Some of us get caught in alphabet soup, so let me try not to do that.
Does anyone else have anything on this issue? Thank you, Mr. Dravinovich.
Thank you.
Ms. Holly?
Are there any other questions related to wastewater?
I have one more.
Okay.
I want to go back and talk about the debt service, and let me recap what I think you said. The wastewater fund owed the water fund about $1.2 million.
Electric and gas.
Something like that?
Yes.
Water and gas.
Electric and gas.
Electric and gas.
Yes.
So it's going to pay gas back $1 million?
The principal due to the gas fund is $466,000. To the electric fund is $612,000.
Okay. I didn't hear the electric part. So this is going to satisfy the debt for the wastewater when they borrowed money from the water fund. I keep saying the gas fund and the electric fund about 10 years ago. It was it was a long time ago.
2008.
It was a sizable amount of money, a couple $1 million.
$3 million.
Okay, and this is going to satisfy that.
It is.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that.
Well, let me follow up on that.
Yes, sir.
So in theory, by satisfying that should also make the budget easier for each of those. That debt payment will go away, so there should be money to help that budget, annual budget, is that correct?
The wastewater budget, yes.
For wastewater.
Yes.
So the question would be, is that savings going to be spent, or is that savings going to be saved in terms of rates?
We'd like to save that money, Mr. Shanks, but I guess we have to see what the future brings for this fund.
There is not some preconceived notion that staff has at this point on that.
There's not.
I mean, what generated the discussion to pay these things off early?
The primary concern was that we have these note payments out there that the wastewater fund is paying interest on them. And it could be beneficial to the electric and gas funds to receive the inflow of cash. These are receivables on their books. So the primary thought pattern was that we've got debt, and much the same as you would at home, if you could pay it off early, you probably should, to save yourself the interest.
Yes, now that all makes sense. I just find it interesting that we decided to do it now, not 5 years ago or not next year.
We were in a position to do it this year because projects were delayed in wastewater that we're not going to be able to complete until year 17. What's nice about this is it allows the unrestricted fund balance in the wastewater fund to grow to the level it needs to. And we're able to fund all the projects possibly through the fund without having to go to any other source.
Okay.
And the wastewater fund had been operating with a negative fund balance until 2015, and it's now turned.
Okay.
Any other wastewater questions?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, then we'll move to the water fund. The narrative begins on page 15. We discussed earlier that the cost of service study that was completed in 2015 recommended a rate increase of 3%, which would be approximately $240,000. We've included that amount on page 19. It's actually at the top of page 20. Rate change revenue, $242,910. This fund also projects a 0% growth rate. Mr. Smith mentioned earlier that there's a possibility of having another source of revenue restored from the general fund, and I think that most likely that is something that would have to be resolved when the general fund is balanced. At this point, I don't know whether the general fund could restore that money to the utility. So at this point, I've got it rate change revenue, but it could be revenue from the municipal fund. I've itemized for you the water
Excuse me. So is it possible that we can, as part of our budget recommendation, that we would recommend that that money be reinstated and that that increase in the water rates not be followed through? Mr. Larkin, would you like to talk about that?
I know that there had been a discussion asked about that. The current budget could not afford that in the general fund, and I don't, based on the limited information we have now, don't anticipate that we'd be able to afford it again this year. Revenues, typical general fund revenues have increased, but not to meet what we would expect to be our increases in expenditures. And this being one of those expenditures that would be ongoing and operational in nature, wouldn't be recommended to try to draw revenue from fund balance in order to make up for that. So at this point, not having all the information, not having it all in front of me, I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending that myself. I'm not aware of other cities that practice that. I'm not saying that there aren't other cities that do, but I'm not aware of that as being a general practice. And for that reason, I'm skeptical about it myself.
All right. Thank you.
Water expenditures, I've listed for you by division the pluses and there. Notably, we've got an increase for testing, and also an increase in chemicals due to quantity and annual increases from our vendors. The other most notable part of the operating budget is that we have a decrease in administration of about $43,000 because we had one division, it was known as water engineering, that we have made part of other budgets rather than allocating them from the water budget. So we'll see an increase in engineering within the other funds, 53 and 54, as a result of that. We also had one personnel that we distributed entirely to the gas fund. And the other changes are due to just distribution of wages. In regular capital, these expenses are shared with the gas fund. We've requested 2 replacement vehicles, they're service vehicles, a backhoe, and a skid steer cold planer. Our projects include short main pipeline, fire hydrant replacement, new services, and engineering, and there is that $100,000 contingency that we discussed before. In the water...
Getting back up on the engineering, the decrease, that amount was increased in the gas fund?
We had one division that at a point in time, it was called water engineering, and it was the administration of the engineering building. So it included a manager, it included an administrative assistant and their benefits, as well as common expenses for that building. Office supplies, the copier, things of that nature. And we now only have one individual who is still being charged to that particular division. So rather than have a division that had one person that we were then going to allocate, we just allocated that individual among the budgets.
All right, but you said a net decrease of 30,000 personnel, one technician.
Right.
To the gas fund.
Yes, we have one individual whose responsibilities are, in fact, all gas and no water, but in the past he'd been allocated along with the other personnel. So for this budget year, we moved him 100% to the gas fund to reflect the nature of his responsibility.
So that increase will be in the gas.
Yes.
Decreased here. The net effect's 0.
Yes.
I have a question while we're talking about, do we have any lead pipes anymore in water distribution?
Lead services.
My name is Alan Wiles, Director of Water and Gas Division. I think to my knowledge, I don't think, but to my knowledge, we do not have any lead services in our city. I spoke to Barry this morning about this. There was a study done some number of years ago before I was employed here and about that issue, and I've seen some of those results. And the position is that we knowingly do not have any of those services. Perhaps Barry, if you would like, Barry can add more to some of the technical details about that study.
I mean, I think I remember years ago we were replacing some lead pipes, and maybe we've gone through all of those, and I don't remember how long ago that was.
I think that was before I employed here.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I've seen some of the paperwork about that.
That statement refers to just on our side of the meter, is that correct?
Yes.
So the homeowner still needs to be aware that they may have issues that they need to have inspected.
That's possible. I don't have any data on that.
Right. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't false security. It's just our side of the meter.
That's correct.
When there were lead pipes, I mean, what did the lead pipes really look like? I mean, I know galvanized pipe and black iron pipe.
I'm not sure I've seen one myself, but I'm sure it's just you can tell the color of lead and its demeanor it's a dark gray color. Mm-hmm. It's from the Roman times because I've visited some of those sites. So, Barry, can you add any to that?
Barry Duncan, the Director of Water and Gas Treatment, water and wastewater treatment, not gas. But something to add to that, to bring up a good question about the homeowners side from the meter to the house. Some of you may not remember, but EPA came out with the Lead Control Act initially, which required utilities to replace the lead service lines from the main in the street to the individual's house. Well, the utilities went up in arms because they were getting onto private property, a lot of legal issues. I'm sure Clark could fill in a lot of blanks with that, but the utility said we just can't do that. So when the lead service lines and the city replaced them from the main to the meter, the homeowner was advised that they had lead service line. You also have lead tin solder in all the copper pipe. You also have lead in a lot of the old fixtures that hadn't been replaced. So you have other sources of lead too that contribute to that. But as far as Danville goes, we've replaced all of the, that we know of, all of the lead service lines from the main to the meter. And if we find one, by happen chance, if we make some repairs and find one, Alan then immediately replace it if we happen to find one. So far, we hadn't found one in some number of years. That in fact, I hadn't heard of any since I've been employed.
Ms. Holly?
Okay. The regular capital maintenance at the wastewater treatment plant includes repairs and maintenance to the tanks and equipment, of pumps and motors, and repairs to the building. We have $1,165,000 in CIPs, capital improvement projects. The water treatment plant has a $340,000 project, and the details of that begin on page 13. There's a narrative that describes what will be performed. We have school field dam repairs of $100,000. That would be page 13 of the capital improvement package. The dam is on page 11. In distribution, we started a project last year, Blue Water Plant Reservoir Project. We've requested an additional $400,000 in 2017 for that. Begins on page 9. And then we have our water line reconstruction project, $325,000. It begins on page 7.
Can we go over again the trihalomethanes and that we were going to be reducing them, and what is the probability that they will be reduced to where we're needing them to be? And I guess we've got money budgeted in the future years for that, I guess, providing that we don't reduce them earlier.
Right. What we have done at this point in time, very done with wastewater treatment. What we've done at this point in time, we've treated addressed the THM problem with mixing and equipment. About $800,000 that was spent to put it in an 8 million gallon tank in Blue Park. They were required to we had to get about 35% removal to meet what we projected by the model in the far ends of the distribution system to meet the THM limits of 80 micrograms per liter. We did get that reduction, and we think we have it covered, but it's dependent on water age and the time the water spends in the system and the tanks. And it's hard to project even with the models. So we said we may have to install some, particularly we have 3 standpipes, and particularly 2 of them at the far ends of the system, one on Westover and one, now the one on Westover used to have turnover in it because it served the PCSA water, but we don't anymore. They buy water from Henry County to serve that area. And the one on the southeast side goes down to 86 to serve the North Elementary School. So those 2 tanks don't have much turnover, and we may have to install mixing equipment in those 2 tanks, possibly aeration equipment too, if we can't meet those limits. So we put that aside. I think it was $75,000 for each or something like that to do that if we had to. All indications are, and we've only had 2 sets of samples from the Blue Park tank now from the system, since we put the mixing and aeration equipment in Blue Park. You have to go through 4 quarters before you know whether you're in compliance or not, because you average for 4 quarters. So we've been, so far, the 2 analyses we've got were lower than the ones last year, so that's good. But we won't know how effective they are until we go through the summer months and the critical months. So, but it looks like we're going to be in compliance, but we got to go through 2 more quarters to find out for sure. But that's why we set the money, additional funds aside if we have to put mixing and aeration equipment in probably those 2 standpipes. It could happen that maybe one of the elevated tanks may end up, we have to do it. But most of the other tanks, the turnover is pretty quick. Piney Forest tank turns over well because it serves the county. Same thing with 3rd Avenue. Same thing with 58 East. We have the Glenwood tank. The outside tank doesn't turn over as readily because it serves mainly a smaller service area, which is Nestle in the surrounding area. So we have a little problem with turnover. But we think we have it satisfied, but we won't know until we finish the testing.
So as soon as it's warm, it gets hot again, we'll be able to test some more, and if they don't meet recommended limits, then immediately we're going to do something with it.
Right.
With the money that we have budgeted.
Yes, sir. And if we don't need the money, will be turned back in. One thing, just to maybe help a little bit, because it helped me, it took me 10 years to find this out. Regular capital maintenance money and CIP money, capital investment program, capital improvement program, regular capital is for those expenditures that you know are going to happen, but you don't know what they are. For instance, lightning strikes the water plant, burns up a 700 horsepower motor. That's $75,000. That's what regular capital is for, those things, the big items, and they are capitalized. So they do have to capitalize, but that's what the accountants say you have to do. But that's for those things that you do not necessarily have a project specified for. CIP are ones we know we're going to do. And so we set those aside instead of accounts. But it took me a long time to understand, because I always wanted to lump them together. But regular capital is for those big expenses that you know you're going to have, but you don't know what they are.
Barry, while you up there on the dam, Schofield Dam repairs, is that just for inspection, or are they actually going to do some repairs for the $100,000?
We have the inspection. We just got bids in for the inspection. They have to do an underwater inspection. They can't drop it because they can't get into the divers can't get into the fast-moving water. So we have to make the water as stagnant as we can. The divers are going to do that job. We spent about $20,000. I forget what it was. I think it was about $12,000. We had $20,000 set aside for it. One bid came in pretty low at about $12,000. So they'll do the inspection, and from that inspection, we'll see what we have to do. $100,000 probably is not going to cover all the cost. We know we have some repairs to be made. Some of the frames we know are loose, and probably some of them may be corroded on the gates. They have to be fixed because you can't let those things go. But we're hoping we can then project and fix those critical things first with the $100,000, and then from there we'll go for further years to see if we need to spend any more. Hopefully we won't have to spend any more, but knowing how old that structure is, and we've rebuilt the gates themselves, all of them fairly recently, within the last 15 years, but the gates, the frames around the gates have never been touched, so we know we got some issues there.
One more, in the Blue Park, the water mains, there's capital money there for replacing those mains because they're odd sizes and the fittings can't be easily obtainable. How much money is that worth? And is it just the fittings? Can we?
Oh, no. It's the pipe and the fittings. What's happened, the pipe is, I believe I'm right, and Alan can correct me, but it's like 22.5-inch diameter. We can't even get fittings for it. If we were to have a break up there, that's the heart line of our whole system. If we lose something up there, we've lost the whole city. So we decided this had to have a high priority, and Alan and I got together, and this is only one phase of it. We have, I think it's 3 phases that we're going to do this in, and this is just the first phase up in the actual Blue Park area. We're also going to replace that same pipe from the Blue Park down to the water plant, and also from the Blue Park earth, and get rid of all that oddball pipe and all those old valves that some of them don't work. We even got a left-handed valve up there that you don't see it anymore, but, so we're trying to replace and fix that. So one, we can segregate everything and know where everything is and have new equipment there, and get rid of this oddball where we can't even get fittings for anymore.
Okay.
Thank you, Barry.
Jenny, could we go back to revenue on page 17, charges for service? I couldn't help but notice that in 2015, our revenue was just about where we're proposing it for next year with the increase. And what happened that we would lose all that revenue? In 2015, the actual was about $8,205,000. We're proposing with the increase to go to $8,264,000. What happened that we lost revenue to require that? Do you know?
I don't think that it's really revenue that we lost. What happened was we had a higher volume in 2015 than we're projecting in 2017. The number of customers has not grown. It's not significantly increased or decreased, so it's volume.
So we've lost, we didn't grow, but did we lose?
We didn't lose customers, we lost some volume.
Lost volume?
Yes.
From some of the industrial customers?
Well, according to what's budgeted is mainly in residential and industrial, a small amount.
Could our meters not be recording properly, or?
Well, we recently, in fact, we're in process and an audit now of the meters to ensure that they are properly recording, and they hadn't been inspected, some of them, since they were installed. So we've had a system-wide meter audit initiated. It started back in the summer and it's ongoing. So we hope to be able to address those issues.
If we didn't lose customers, and then such as a major industrial, I don't see why we would lose that much.
The 2016 and 17 budgeted amounts were based on a cost of service study, which went back to 2012 through 2014. So it could be that we're a little low in our projections. We'll know as this year closes how close we are.
If we are low, we may not need the rate increase.
That's possible.
We did, I mean, it rained a lot more this past year, and people didn't water lawns as much, you know.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure. I might be asking the same question as Mr. Turpin. The actual in 15 was 8.2 million. The projected revenue from charges for services in the new budget is 8.26.
Right.
That includes the rate increase too?
It does.
Yeah.
So, okay, I see what your question was, and it looks like more explaining needs.
Well, I'll be glad to go back to the cost of service study and determine if the volumes are too low in the study. That is the basis for both 2016 and 2017.
Okay, thank you.
We do typically budget more conservatively than what our actual comes in. We try to be more than what we budget, and maybe the amount, the discrepancy is more than it should be, and we'll get that information back.
Yeah. We'll investigate it for you.
Last question. This is one of the rate study suggestions that was not passed by council. Is that correct?
It was delayed a year because it didn't go into effect till fiscal year 17. But when we look at rate increases, we need to think beyond.
Well, I think this past one was the first time since I've been on council where we didn't pass a recommended budget increase in a utility fund.
But what I'm saying is not only how it affects the next fiscal year, but the fiscal years further out. Because you're talking about 3% not only in the upcoming year, but the next year's out too.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So with all of this information, the fund is forecasted to contribute $40,060 to its fund balance in 2017. Okay, we'll move along to the gas fund. The narrative begins on page 33. The revenue for gas is forecasted to be lower than 2016, as well as the purchased gas. And you can see those effects on page 34 in charges for services, and then further down the page, source of supply. It's approximately $1.7 million difference in each of those lines. So our margin remains constant, but the dollars change. In the expenditures, we spoke earlier about the personnel who'd been moved from the water fund to the gas fund in engineering. And in the other divisions, we have some ups and some downs depending on how personnel has been classified. In regular capital maintenance, in addition to those items, the vehicles, the backhoe, and the skid steer are shared with the water fund. We have a leak survey combustible gas indicator unit. Then we have short main pipeline, new gas mains, and new services, and the contingency. The projects are $1.5 million, and that's unchanged. However, we reduced the cast iron replacement from $1.5 million to $1,375,000, and we've recommended a new project known as the Northern Gas Feed. You can see these projects in your capital improvement package beginning on page 15. And the Northern Gas Feed is on page 18. Again, this fund requires a transfer from the fund balance of $350,000 in order to fully fund the operating and capital budgets.
I had a question on the Northern Gas Feed. I guess this is just for the engineering feasibility of it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you going to bring that main, maybe you don't know yet, but are you going to bring that main down a main highway right away, and what would be the pressure of that main?
The answer is yes. Alan Wiles, the Water and Gas Division Director. Yes, we're really looking at two routes. One, I'm sorry I don't have the route numbers, but one is at the gate station that is for Brockway Glass off the Williams Pipeline. The second one is another, if you go straight out Mount Cross Road, it intersects the Williams Pipeline, and there's not a gate station there. So we're looking at both of those routes. We're looking at also the right-of-way, just that you mentioned, which gives us the better route-of-way. It could be that the longer route gives us a better right-of-way situation. So that's what we want to, that's some of the things we want to study, is to actually look at the route, make a decision on the route, and secondly, the materials that we would use. I think we were looking at I forgot now, but I think we were looking at a 125-pound line coming down to somewhere where it reaches our mains at Sandy, what's the school right there, Twin Arch School, and then we'd do a regulator station to bring it down to 58 pounds. And we would intersect where our mains end on Route 41.
Normally, unless things change, those high-pressure mains, you don't really want to bring down a highly populated area or a main highway, I wouldn't think. Those high-pressure mains ought to be sort of cross-country.
Well, we have the high-pressure main out cross-country from the current gate station, but we do have a 125-pound line that goes all the way inside the city, down Riverside Drive and some other locations. So it would be no different than what we
Does
have.
Office of Pipeline Safety require you not to put that high-pressure mains in any populated area? Do they have regulations on that?
Don't worry, we will follow any PHMSA regulations that's required. Right now, some discussions among ourselves about the design parameters haven't been finalized.
Could I follow up on that? What is why are we doing this?
Redundancy.
We're doing this to add redundancy to our system. Right now, we have a single feed from the west near Stony Mill Road. It feeds cross-country on an electric right-of-way, and then it starts to distribute at different parts of the city. If we had a problem on that line, we would lose the city. We have no second feed. So this is to provide a second feed in a geographically different direction. In the event that we had, for instance, we could have a problem at on a main at 41, and without a second feed, we could lose parts of the city. So this is to add redundancy to our system that we don't have now.
And so you're looking at either near Twin Springs School on 41.
That would be the end point, if you would, where it would join to our system.
Or you said Brockway?
We're looking at two routes to get to that point.
Right. And one of them's Brockway?
Well, there's two roads that lead to the Williams Pipeline in that area. One is the Route 41. If you go straight out to Route 41, you'll intersect the Williams Pipeline. If you go out Route 41, there's another road that goes, I don't know the route number, but it's a different route that would intersect the Williams Pipeline again at the Brockway Glass station that serves Brockway Glass.
But that's nowhere near Brockway. That's cross-country.
Yes, that's where the tap is.
That was the geography of that.
That's correct. Looking at the two routes.
They're both up there in Mount Herman and Callis area.
Yes, correct.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Dustin, I just have to remember, does the Lynchburg Gas have a line down to Brockway?
That's the Lynchburg gas line.
What pressure is that? Do you know?
I don't know.
If in an emergency, would we be able to, could they support us in any way on that?
No, I mean, it's miles to get to that, from that to our system. That's what we're trying to achieve with this.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Alan.
So the gas fund is forecasted to return $26,950 to its fund balance in fiscal 2017.
I have a question. The wastewater payback, where's that shown in here? You said it was $610,000?
Actually, it would be $466,000. It's not included in the revenue for gas. It's actually on the balance sheet as a receivable, so there's no mechanism in the budget to record that. It's changing the nature of the asset from...
So it's going to go, you're going to reduce the receivable, increase the unrestricted fund balance?
Yes. No, cash.
Cash. I'm looking at the combining statement of net assets, and I've got a loan on here for $610. Is that the?
That's the electric.
No, that's the gas. Is that what I'm looking at?
What page are you on?
I'm on page 8 of the agenda packet that has the monthlies.
So the numbers that I'm presenting to you are in 2017 rather than in the 2016 budget that you're looking at now. So that's the balance as of November
Right.
30th, 20,
Because that changes every month, or does
Yes.
it change every
Well,
month?
it's going to change at the end of the year.
Right, because it's not, you don't do it monthly.
Right.
But that is the thing.
It is,
That's the thing.
yes.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions in the gas fund?
Jeez. All right.
We'll move to the electric fund. The narrative begins on page 45 and continues on 46. The revenue in the electric fund, the charges for services, increased $9.5 million as a result of the purchase power increasing $9.5 million. So essentially what's happening is we're recommending the 1.5% rate increase, which would be about $1.7 million. And then the balance would have to be funded through the PCA. And certainly I know you want to talk about the cost of power.
What page are you on now, Jenny?
I'm on the narrative on page 45, but you can see the effects in the charges for services on page 49.
Can you make something clearer for me? There was originally in the biennial study no rate increase for this year,
Not for 2016.
but are you
For
saying on this? I mean, for 2017?
2017, 1.5%, which was $1.7 million. But due to the changes in our portfolio, including the amp hydros and the capacity market, our purchase power has increased significantly. And we'll have to cover that.
So if we have that, that's projected increase in cost of our power, right?
Yes.
So that'll flow right to the PCA,
Yes.
and which will require an increase.
The
to
PCA
the
would
PCA.
eventually require an increase.
Is there any way you can kind of calculate or project what that percent increase would mean to, say, a residential customer? That would be in addition to the 1.5%. And the other thing that I thought about, and I know you don't have the numbers to do it yet, but when you implement these lower industrial rates and you separate the lower cost segment of the pie, and you're going to have a separate PCA for them, when you pull out that lower cost, it's going to flow through to be an increase in the other PCA section, which will amount to an increase to the other customers through the PCA. If you follow what I'm saying. When you pull out the lower cost, power cost, it's going to automatically raise the average cost of the remaining, which that's going to have an impact too, I think. So when you get, right now, I know you don't know how many is going to participate, et cetera, but I think that's going to have an impact on the PCA.
Well, let's explain this a little bit further before, so we can get a little bit more detail behind it. The hydros will be coming online periodically over the next year, between now and next January of 17. So once a unit comes online, we'll owe debt service for that unit. So far, only one unit has come online, and there's 8 total units to come online. There's 3 plants, and 2 of them have 3 units, 1 of them has 2 units. So as those units come online, we'll pay that debt service monthly. And the power generation and the cost of transmission and any congestion that's involved with that. We'll also receive capacity credit for that project. But the debt service is the big thing, the big animal in the room as far as keeping your eye on what that cost is going to be. But we'll monitor that. We're not asking for a PCA increase immediately. We'll keep an eye on that and come back to the commission of what our recommendation is. But that's not the biggest cost here. It's capacity revenue that we've had a decline in starting in June. Some of our projects that we have with AMP, PGM is not giving us the amount of capacity revenue. Fremont, for example, if you have this sheet in front of you, if you notice, there's 2 different lines here. You have a green one that's noted First Energy. That's our Fremont capacity revenue that we get from that project, and that's through May of this year. We get $8.91 per kW per month. So we have 50,000 kilowatts for that one plant. It will drop down to $3.93 starting in June. So that's revenue that will decline, and that's part of this factor that we estimate here. The same thing with the hydros, our SEPA power. We currently receive $4.13. It will drop down to $2.99 for 2016 and 2017. But starting next year, they both go back up to $4.49. So that's the biggest cost that's affecting us. It's about $2.4 million.
Well, I understand the cost is going up. We've got to flow it through the PCA. Right. I understand that. I just want to help us know what to expect in terms of the impact.
Right.
When you know it and can. And also, that other area I'm talking about, I think is going to have an impact when you pull some of the lower cost out and for the industrial rates. It's going to make the average cost go up for the remaining customers in that PCA. And I believe it'll have some effect. Now, how much, I don't know.
Right. We have some areas that are going up. We have some areas going down. Prairie State's going down. We have some blocks that are coming off at the end of the year. So we're kind of juggling these and trying to see what's the best decision moving forward. So it's really month to month and trying to determine what's the long range plan for the whole customers.
The other thing, Jenny, I wasn't sure, up at the top on page 45, you said gross revenue from customers in fiscal year is projected to be $121 million. Where is that number?
Where's the number?
In the revenue sheet.
Okay.
Is that a typo?
If you look on page 50, charges for services, $123 million. I deducted those other accounts, miscellaneous charges, penalties, wheeling, to arrive at that number.
You said page 50?
Page 50. There's a subtotal of $123,213,840.
123 million, right. So that's the 121 just a little off.
No, it's not off. I deducted miscellaneous charges on page 49. Miscellaneous charges, penalties, wheeling, things that aren't directly for power. Under charges for services, there are probably 10 or so lines that make up the total. So I deducted the ones that weren't specifically for rates.
Are you seeing they make up the difference between 121
Yes.
and 123?
Yes. Okay. Other electric expenditures, I sent changes in divisions for you on pages 45 and 6. Notably, administration services, you'll see the total on page 47 decreased $587,000. And there are many components to that one line item, so I attempted to summarize them for you on this page. The largest one was the decrease in the projected pay increase, as well as a decrease in allocations from the general fund.
Well, all through that, Jenny, engineering, distribution, meters, are we hiring additional people, or is that just existing people's salaries?
We are not hiring additional people.
No additional people.
But as we discussed in the beginning, for all funds, the money that we projected for raises in 2016 was all in one line item. So in 2017, as people benefited from those raises beginning July 1, 2016, we've included it within the specific divisions in the 2017 budget. So the divisions will be higher, but where we accounted for at one time in administration the raises for the entire fund, that's gone down. I've listed for you the other divisions and the significant changes in those, and many of them are the pay for performance and compression, raises and benefits. We also have in engineering, we have a large increase for the disposal of waste oil and the transformer products that we haven't accounted for in previous years in that account. In the hydro facility, we have some regulatory requirements that we're required to meet. We have engineering and outside services. And in utility administrative services, there's a substantial increase in consultant services. We have the addition of the energy supply consultant that the steering committee recommended. And we also have to account for a rate study in 2017. Regular capital, we have 0 vehicle replacements requested. That summary is on page 61. You can see the components of that. And for capital projects, we have $3.1 million proposed. $1.5 million would be financed from bonds. We have the $500,000 energy efficiency fund and $100,000 the utilities warehouse. We already have a project for that. The electric fund CIPs begin on page 20, and the details begin on page 22.
Could you explain a little bit about that GIS software replacement? Evidently, whatever you've got's sort of been a flop.
Okay.
And you replaced it, I can gather.
So the details of that are on page 30 of the CIP project package.
Good evening. My name is Greg Disher. I am the Director of Power and Light. As you ask about the GIS software, my understanding when coming on board, we had a product called AUD, AUD was supposed to help our engineers and designers to be able to quickly design as well as do estimates on what it would cost to upgrade our system where it comes to designing additional spans of line, poles for loading poles with far as number of conductors, equipment, and so forth. Also helping with some underground designs, some various tools from that AUD for the engineer. Also, it was supposed to help provide system upgrades quicker. So when you do the design and do the construction, get the red lines, it should update the GIS a lot quicker versus, taking time manually. But from what I was told, and Jason can add on to this, that we had several folks work on this dedicated to try to get that system up to speed, and it was very unsuccessful. And so instead of adding more dollars to a tool that doesn't seem to be working out adequately for us, we decided to can it and go with a new product. And so that's what you see here as the new product, which is Ezra based, and it'll help us do a lot more than what the AUD was intended to do for us.
Anybody else have anything else, Mr.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions in the electric fund?
Yes. I have a couple. The bonds, we're going to have $1.5 million in bonds issued. Correct?
Yes.
So when do we issue those bonds? What's the timing of that?
They normally issue them in the summer. Michael, do you want to speak to that?
Oh, okay.
To answer your question, in a period of rising interest rates like we've expected over the last year or so, we try to issue those as close to the beginning of the fiscal year as we can to take advantage of as low of rates as we can, so that we anticipate that those would be issued toward the end of July, first part of August.
So we're going to 5.
That's what's been asked for by the utility budget, yes.
Okay. Now, one of the projects I'm assuming for that is the streetlight upgrade program. That's going to be bonds?
It could be one of them that would be funded with bonds.
Yes.
Well, that's what it says, so
Yes.
I'm assuming that's right. And that is from last year's proposal, that's a $3.5 million project.
It would be a $5 million project. It would be an annual project until it's complete.
Well, last year was $3.5 million.
Well, I think that's all it showed it through the 5-year plan.
My understanding was it was 7 years, 3.5. You're saying it's a $5 million project? So it's a $5 million project. So you're going to borrow $500,000 worth of bonds every year for 10 years?
That could be done.
Is that what you're going to do? Isn't there a certain fixed cost involved with these bonds?
Yes, I mean, we combine both the general fund needs and the electric fund or utility fund needs and do that issue at one time so that we can maximize the cost of counsel, the cost of our interest, our financial advisors, the closing cost associated with the bond issue. So the city would not just be issuing $1.5 million in bonds, it would be combined with other general governmental needs.
All right, okay. All right, thank you.
Before, I've got one question on.
Sure.
It involves debt service, and I'm not sure who the correct person to ask, but on page 46, debt service, there's an increase of $209,200 increase in principal payments. What is that?
As you know, we've refinanced debt over the last couple of years, at least, maybe the past 2 or 3. We always have a period of time at the beginning with interest payments, and then the principal payments begin. So without looking, my suspicion is that we have some of those principal payments popping in for the first time.
Okay. The reason why I ask you having refinanced all this, I would have thought our debt service would have been going down as opposed to.
I can't
Unless
remember
it was
numbers.
new issuance.
Right, and we did have a new issuance last year for electric, so that's certainly part of it.
Thank you.
So I want to get back to the street light here. So it's going to be $5 million. That's the plan.
And it could be funded from year to year. It doesn't have to be consecutive.
Okay. But it looks like it's got to be funded with bonds. But I'm satisfied with the answer that Mr. Agnew gave, and I appreciate that. So, do we know how we're going to? What's the plan to recover this $5 million? And how is this going to work out?
So if the program was approved, we would design a street light rate for that LED light that would include the cost of the fixture, the maintenance, and the energy. And we would take the number of fixtures and bill the city for that rate times the number of fixtures annually.
My understanding is this is going to be a build out over several years.
Right.
So we got to have a rate the first day we put in the first fix.
Exactly.
So we're going to recover our carrying charge,
Right.
our interest, and our cost of financing the project. We're going to get all our money back for and then we're going to have a power rate.
Right. And a maintenance. And the maintenance of any maintenance required of maintaining the light.
And the maintenance is going to be charged monthly. The maintenance is going to be as needed.
Right.
It's not. We're not giving them a service contract.
Right. It's part of the rate.
It's fixed pre. It's going to be part of the rate.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
when you're going to do sort of a bench test or a trial run to determine what's going to be the best lights for this, where do we stand on that?
The lights, they haven't all come in, but they should be up in the next month or month and a half. They're going to be installed on 58 West from really the movie theater up to the cemetery there. So there's several different manufacturers that will be evaluated over the next 6 months.
So you plan to do that before you really commit to this big program?
Right.
Okay.
So I'm really concerned that we're going to go borrow the money, pay the interest, and I'm not sure when we're going to start collecting on this. I mean, we were just told we got a PCA problem, and we got costs, and we're trying to work through those issues, and we're trying to make sure that we can follow through on this industrial rate. And we got $500,000 that I don't know how long it'll take, but we're gonna front the money for some street lights. And I have a real problem with that. And I just want y'all to know that. We got ratepayers that we need to answer to, and we've got street lights, and I don't know that we need any LED street lights. I don't see how that goes to the top of the list when we've got some other things that we're trying to accomplish here. So I just wanted to point that out.
As long as, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go ahead. Yes.
There was a vendor that came forward last year and spoke to council and to the utility commission. And then can you because nobody seems to know on council, what happened to that vendor's proposal? Can someone, because that has to do with the same money that the chairman's speaking of.
Mr. Lawrence.
If you don't mind me jumping in.
Go ahead.
They did submit a proposal with a contract, and the information in that contract did not accurately depict what they were telling us verbally. And we've since asked for them to resubmit information. And this was 3 months ago. Last time we talked about it during a city council meeting, I had already asked for it before that, actually, and I've still yet to receive anything from them. So at this point, I'm waiting for information, have not received it. And based on the responsiveness for that and other things, I'm not sure when to anticipate it.
Okay. The second question along those same lines is, there has been over the years much discussion. You mentioned the test area that you're going to be working on Riverside Drive. There's been discussion as far as spacing and whether all those lights are necessary, not just there, but South Boston Road, several different places. I assume if you're going to switch out the lighting, there are other things that happen on that pole as well for each light that is used. Is there any consideration of the fact or consideration by staff that perhaps all that lighting is not necessary?
Yeah, we can include as part of this project.
Well, it's good that, I mean, if we do the project, it certainly is supposed to pay for itself over the years, but it seemed like you could fix more than one problem if you look into that as well, as far as the density of the lighting.
And VDOT basically these through our revenue sharing funds, it's my understanding. So it's, any maintenance money we get from the state for the streets also includes money for street lights. So it's charged back to the general fund, and they pay for that service. And it would be anticipated that any new cost would also be passed along. But the theory is that the reduced cost in energy will balance that out, so there wouldn't be an increase in cost necessarily to the general fund.
Well, I appreciate that the general fund is not going to have to pay anymore. But I'm thinking about Danville Power and Light, and I'm thinking about the ratepayers. Anybody else? Go ahead.
The electric fund is forecasted to contribute $100,530 to the fund balance in fiscal 17. If there are no other questions for the electric fund, we'll move to telecommunications. The summary for telecommunications begins on page 67. The summary by function is on page 68, and the details begin on page 69. Telecommunications revenues are forecasted based upon the actual data from the prior year, and we also had a loss of a few accounts, school accounts.
School internet accounts.
Internet accounts.
Not transport.
We had an increase in the source of supply. We had additional PRI lines for the telephone service and a backup internet connection. In regular capital maintenance, we have requested one replacement vehicle, and we have $340,000 in the fiber to the home phase 3. Telecommunications has no debt, and we forecast the fund to contribute $8,110 to its fund balance. Are there any specific questions on telecommunication?
Can we talk about a minute about the cable, the fiber to the home? Is that gaining any traction with customers in the areas? What are the areas that are now being served?
The Averett community between Central Boulevard and Blue Park. So there's about 1,000 homes there. And then you have the apartment complexes downtown, most of them. Pemberton lost, the Continental, used to be Lindsay lost, and then you have Fox Hollow off of Westover, and then just recently completed within the past 3 weeks is part of Windsor Heights, most of Windsor Heights. So that is still left. There's a few pieces there that needs to be put together, but that's just recently completed.
Are you getting an uptake, or are you getting any traction on attracting new customers?
Averett has a lot of rental properties, so there's a lot of turnover there of customers in and out. Fox Hollow was very successful, about a 30% take rate last time I saw. So that's just in the first year. So that was a tremendous success in that neighborhood.
So this capital you're going to spend in the upcoming year is going to go to what areas? Have you decided?
It's to finish Windsor Heights, part of Windsor Heights, the back portion of Windsor Heights, and to move up 58, the Oak Hill area, the James Road area, and then there's a neighborhood, West Haven, off of Westover.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything else? Go ahead.
If no one has additional questions, then my presentation is complete.
Anybody have anything else? Ms. Howell. Anybody have any other comments they'd like to make about what we've heard today? We will be voting on this budget next month at our February meeting. If you have any other questions or comments or clarifications, please contact either Ms. Holly or Mr. Gray. I think you got all that information. I'm sure they'd be glad to hear it from us, and whatever extra information we need, if we could pass that along to them, we can get those answers to us in the next meeting. All right, communications from the city manager.
I just want to thank the Utility Commission for its thoughtful discussion of the budget. It helps us as we put something together to present to City Council later on. Appreciate all the thoughts and advice.
Thank you. Staff, Barry. Greg.
You know why?
Please. Please. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to be here. I understand your concern about the LED lighting, but there are, as everyone mentioned, some good advantages for LED. We have a lot of mercury vapor, high pressure sodium, and some other type of lighting on our system. You know, as we look at opportunities for efficiencies and maintenance and reduce costs in those areas, LED helps cover that for you. Also, the LED gives a brighter light and a clearer light and doesn't have that yellow haze like some of these other, like high pressure sodium, mercury vapor, and so forth. So those are some things you want to consider as well when it comes to installing that new lighting or replacing the old with the new. It'll reduce the maintenance, you'll reduce costs because it won't burn as much energy, and it'll give a clearer light for you. So I just wanted to add that to that, just for consideration.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Alan?
No additional comments, sir.
Carolyn? All right. Commission members? Mr. Turpin? Mr. Shanks?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to emphasize or re-emphasize an earlier statement today about the city staff, including Public Works and Danville Utility Department employees, everybody involved with the weather of this and treating the roads and keeping the utilities lit. I think it's been years since we've had an event like this, and it certainly didn't turn out to be as eventful as it was predicted, but the city did a wonderful job of keeping the lights on for us and keeping the roads in position. I'd just like to say thank you to all those city employees that were involved in making that such a successful, or making sure that we were impacted the least. Thank you.
Mr. Shosty?
No.
Ms. Kane? Thank you very much for sitting through this. We'll see you next month, and I declare this meeting adjourned.